The choice that shocked them all. Andrew Carlyle had always been the man people admired, envied, and at times even resented. At 32, he had built an empire from scratch, a multi-million-dollar investment firm that had made him one of the youngest self-made millionaires in the city. With his piercing blue eyes, strong jawline, and tall, athletic build, he fit the mold of success perfectly. He was the man who turned heads when he walked into a room, the one whose name was whispered in exclusive social circles, the bachelor who could have any woman he desired. His friends, colleagues, and even distant acquaintances all had assumptions about the kind of woman he would marry. She would be breathtakingly beautiful, the kind of woman who looked perfect in a designer dress and walked with effortless grace at charity galas. She would be from an elite family, well-educated, poised, and the perfect complement to his status. The kind of woman who knew which wine to order, what fork to use at a 12-course meal, and had her name in high society magazines. So when Andrew announced his engagement to Samantha Evans, the reaction was instant and brutal. At first, people thought it was a joke. Andrew, come on, man, one of his closest friends, Michael, had laughed when he first saw a picture of Samantha. You're serious. This isn't one of your social experiments, right? His business partners exchanged awkward glances. They didn't say much, but their expressions said everything. His family was outright dismayed. You have the world at your feet, his older sister, Caroline, had told him in disbelief. Why would you settle for this? His mother, Eleanor Carlyle, a woman whose entire life had revolved around maintaining appearances, had nearly fainted when she saw Samantha for the first time. She's different, Eleanor had said carefully, trying to suppress her obvious disapproval. Are you sure this is what you want, darling? People might not understand. By different, they all meant the same thing. Samantha was not the kind of woman they had expected for Andrew. She was black. She was plus-sized. She came from a middle-class background. Raised by a single mother in a modest neighborhood, Samantha had spent most of her life working twice as hard for half the recognition. She wasn't born into privilege. She didn't have an Ivy League degree. She wasn't the daughter of a senator or a billionaire tycoon. Instead, she had built herself from the ground up, becoming a respected nutritionist and wellness advocate. She ran her own business, coaching clients to lead healthier, more fulfilling lives, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. She was intelligent, independent, and deeply passionate about helping people, but none of that seemed to matter to the world Andrew belonged to. All they saw was a woman who didn't fit their standards. All they saw was a woman they believed was beneath him. The gossip behind his back. The whispers started almost immediately. They don't even look right together. She's probably after his money. Give it a year, maybe two, he'll get bored. Andrew heard the comments. He wasn't naive. His friends, his colleagues, even distant acquaintances, none of them hid their skepticism well. But he didn't care. Because what they didn't understand, what they refused to see, was that Samantha was everything he had ever wanted. For years, he had dated women who fit the mold of perfection. Models, heiresses, actresses, beautiful, glamorous women who smiled for the cameras, but lacked depth beyond the surface. Samantha was different. She was real. She was the first woman who challenged him, who didn't care about his wealth or his reputation. She didn't pretend to be impressed by the luxury cars or the penthouse views. She saw him for who he was beneath the success, the late nights, the self-doubt, the pressure, the exhaustion that came with building an empire. She cared about him, not his bank account. And that was why he had chosen her. The wedding, they said, would never last. When the wedding day arrived, the skepticism reached its peak. It was a grand event, because, of course, Eleanor Carlyle wouldn't allow her son to have anything less than perfection. The venue was a historic mansion, adorned with chandeliers and white roses, the kind of place reserved for royalty and old money families. Samantha had insisted on keeping it simple, but nothing was simple in the Carlyle family. As she walked down the aisle in her elegant custom-made gown, Andrew watched the faces of the guests. Many smiled out of politeness, but their eyes carried judgment. She doesn't belong here. This is a mistake. He'll regret it. But when Samantha reached him, she smiled. A smile that was warm, genuine, and filled with a love so deep that it silenced everything around him. In that moment, he knew, without a doubt, he had made the right choice. The silent bets against their marriage. The whispers didn't stop after the wedding. If anything, they grew louder. She trapped him. Watch, she'll be pregnant soon, securing that alimony check. He'll wake up one day and realize what a mistake this was. 2 years, tops. Even some of his business partners subtly distanced themselves from him, as if his marriage was a stain on his reputation. His social circle shrank. Invitations to exclusive events slowed. It didn't matter to him. Because while the world watched and waited for his marriage to crumble, Andrew and Samantha were building something real. She supported him in ways no one else ever had. She kept him grounded. She reminded him of who he was beyond the wealth and the power. She taught him about resilience, about seeing beauty beyond societal standards. She didn't just love him, she understood him. And that was something money could never buy. But the world wasn't ready for that. They were still waiting for the fall. What they didn't realize was that in 2 years, they wouldn't be laughing anymore. They would be the ones in shock. The unbreakable bond. The wedding was over, the vows had been exchanged, and the rings had been placed on their fingers. But for many in Andrew Carlisle's world, the real spectacle had just begun. People were waiting. They were waiting for him to wake up one morning and realize he had made a terrible mistake. They were waiting for the fights, the scandals, the inevitable divorce. They were waiting for Samantha to slip up, to reveal herself as a gold digger, a social climber, someone who had tricked him into love. They were waiting for the day he would come crawling back, admitting they had been right all along. But that day never came. Instead, what came next was something no one saw coming, the life they built together. Andrew and Samantha didn't just survive as a married couple, they thrived. In the first year of their marriage, Andrew's life didn't crumble the way people expected. His business didn't suffer. His finances didn't dwindle. His happiness didn't fade. If anything, he was doing better than ever. His company, Carlisle Investments, expanded rapidly, making some of the best financial moves in years. His focus was sharper, his decision-making more precise. Investors who had once been wary of his unconventional marriage had to admit, whatever he was doing was working. But it wasn't just business that flourished. Andrew himself changed in ways no one could have predicted. Before Samantha, he had been living a life of excess, running on autopilot. Expensive cigars, fine whiskey, endless parties. It had been an endless cycle of wealth and indulgence. But Samantha introduced him to something else. Balance. She taught him about wellness, about taking care of his body beyond just lifting weights at a luxury gym. She introduced him to a lifestyle that wasn't about showing off, but about actually feeling good, mentally, emotionally, and physically. She encouraged him to start his mornings with mindfulness instead of stress, to think beyond his next deal, to be present. She taught him how to cook, not just the gourmet meals he was used to at 5-star restaurants, but real food, food that nourished the soul. "You have all the money in the world, Andrew," she told him one night as they cooked dinner together in their penthouse. "But have you ever truly taken care of yourself?" It was a question that stuck with him. Because for all the luxury and power he had, he realized he had never really lived. The weight of judgment. But while Andrew and Samantha were growing stronger together, the world wasn't done doubting them. There were still whispers at every social event, every gala, every business meeting. "She doesn't belong here. He's wasting his life with her. This won't last much longer." Some of his old friends had slowly disappeared, no longer inviting him to exclusive gatherings. Some of his business partners, especially the more traditional ones, still held back, hesitant to fully embrace his new life. Even his mother, Eleanor, hadn't fully accepted Samantha. "She's a lovely woman," Eleanor would say in a forced tone, carefully picking her words. "But, darling, are you sure she can handle this world? Are you sure this is the life you want?" Andrew never wavered. "Yes, mother," he always replied, his voice firm. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." But no matter how much he defended his wife, no matter how much he proved his love, there were always those who refused to see what he saw in her. The first signs of regret. 2 years passed. By then, the whispers had mostly faded. Not because people had suddenly accepted Samantha, but because they had realized something shocking. Samantha wasn't just the woman Andrew married. She had become a force in her own right. While people had spent years judging her, dismissing her, waiting for her to fail, she had been building her small wellness business. It had transformed into a thriving brand. Through her expertise as a nutritionist and wellness advocate, she had expanded her reach, working with top athletes, executives, and even celebrities who sought her guidance. She had written a best-selling book on holistic health and self-love, appearing on national talk shows, podcasts, and interviews. She had become a respected name in an industry where people had once underestimated her, and the very people who had once laughed at her, the ones who had whispered behind Andrew's back. Now, they wanted to know her. Now, they wanted to be associated with her. Now, they saw what Andrew had seen all along. The shocking transformation. The moment that truly shook everyone came one evening, at an exclusive business gala. It was an event filled with the city's elite, CEOs, investors, politicians, the kind of people who had once mocked Andrew's choice in a wife. Samantha walked in, and heads turned. But this time, it wasn't out of judgment. It was out of admiration. In 2 years, she had transformed. Not just in status, but in presence. She carried herself with undeniable confidence, her once dismissed beauty now undeniable, even to those who had once scorned her. She was no longer just Andrew Carlisle's wife. She was Samantha Evans, entrepreneur, author, and sought-after expert. That night, the same people who had once whispered behind her back were now lining up to speak with her, to ask her advice, to network with her. The women who had scoffed at her before were now asking for her secrets, how she had built her empire, how she had mastered her confidence. The men who had doubted Andrew's choice now looked at Samantha in awe, and perhaps just a little regret, because the truth was undeniable now. Andrew hadn't settled. He had made the best choice of his life. And now everyone else could see it too. A lesson they would never forget. That night, as Andrew and Samantha returned home, he turned to her with a smile. "Did you see their faces?" he asked. Samantha chuckled, shaking her head. "Oh, I saw them. They never expected this," he said. "No," she agreed, leaning into him. "They didn't. There was no need to gloat, no need for revenge. The truth had spoken for itself. Andrew had loved her before the world saw her worth. And now, the world regretted ever doubting her. The tables turned. The whispers had turned into murmurs of admiration. The laughter had faded into stunned silence. The same people who had judged Samantha, who had dismissed her as unworthy of Andrew Carlisle, now saw her in a different light. But that was just the beginning. While some regretted their judgment, others still refused to accept the reality in front of them. They were unwilling to admit they had been wrong about her. And in their desperation to validate their initial skepticism, some sought ways to prove that Samantha's success was not her own, that it was Andrew's wealth and influence that had placed her where she was. What they didn't know was that Samantha was about to show them just how wrong they were. The power move that stunned everyone. As Samantha's wellness brand grew, she had been approached by multiple corporations looking to partner with her. Some saw her influence and wanted to capitalize on it, while others genuinely admired the impact she was making in people's lives. But Samantha was careful. She had worked too hard to build something authentic to let it be watered down by corporate greed. And then came an offer that no one saw coming. One of the largest luxury fitness and health brands in the world approached her with a proposal, not to sponsor her, not to collaborate with her, but to make her their CEO. The company, which had previously struggled with declining relevance due to outdated marketing and a lack of inclusivity, saw Samantha as the key to their transformation. They didn't just want her face on their campaigns. They wanted her vision, her leadership, her expertise. It was a position that came with power, influence, and a salary package that stunned even Andrew's wealthiest business associates. When the news broke, the same social circles that had once mocked her were left in utter disbelief. She's the new CEO of Vitalite Wellness Group. How did this even happen? This isn't just a small business anymore. She's running a billion-dollar company. Samantha had gone from the woman they whispered about behind Andrew's back to a dominant force in the industry. And this time, there was no denying that her success was entirely her own. Eleanor Carlisle's silent acceptance. Of all the people in Andrew's life, no one had been more resistant to Samantha than his mother, Eleanor. A woman who had built her entire existence around status, appearances, and high society expectations. Eleanor had never outright insulted Samantha, but her disapproval had been evident in every forced smile, every overly polite comment, every time she subtly tried to introduce Andrew to more suitable women. But even she couldn't ignore reality anymore. Samantha was not just surviving in their world, she was dominating it. And so, one evening, at an elegant dinner hosted at the Carlisle estate, Eleanor did something she had never done before. She pulled Samantha aside and apologized. "I was wrong about you," Eleanor admitted, her voice softer than it had ever been. Samantha raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. Wrong about what exactly? Eleanor hesitated. She had spent years holding on to her beliefs, her prejudices, her silent judgment. But even she had to admit that Samantha had proven her wrong in every way possible. "I judged you unfairly," Eleanor finally said. "And I see now that I underestimated you." Samantha didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She simply smiled, knowing that Eleanor's regret wasn't just about being wrong. It was about the realization that she had nearly alienated the best thing to ever happen to her son. And for the first time, Eleanor Carlisle didn't just tolerate Samantha. She respected her. The people who once laughed, now begging for her attention. As Samantha's empire grew, the people who had once dismissed her were now trying desperately to be in her orbit. Some of Andrew's old friends, who had once placed bets on how long the marriage would last, were suddenly reaching out to invite them to events. "Hey, Andrew, haven't seen you in a while. We should all catch up. Samantha, I'd love to collaborate with you on a new project. Let's grab coffee." Even some of the women who had mocked her were now following her on social media, commenting on her posts, pretending as if they had been supportive all along. And yet, Samantha never forgot. She remembered every snide comment. She remembered every cruel laugh. She remembered every dismissive glance at their wedding. But she never addressed it outright. Instead, she let her success do the talking. The ultimate moment of regret. 2 years after their wedding, the same exclusive social club that had once turned its nose up at Samantha now extended a formal invitation for her to become a member. Not because of Andrew. Not because she was his wife. But because she was Samantha Evans, CEO, entrepreneur, and an undeniable powerhouse. The irony wasn't lost on her. These were the same people who had once whispered, "She doesn't belong here." And now, they were practically begging for her presence. Andrew's "I told you so" moment. One evening, as Andrew and Samantha sat on their balcony, sipping wine, he glanced over at her with a smirk. "2 years ago, they thought you were a mistake," he said, shaking his head. "Now they're acting like they've always been your biggest supporters." Samantha chuckled, swirling her wine glass. People love to rewrite history when it benefits them. He reached for her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. "I never had a doubt," he told her. "Not once." She met his gaze, her heart swelling. I know. And that was what mattered. Not the opinions of the doubters, not the regret of those who had misjudged her, but the love they had always believed in. And as the world finally saw her for who she had always been, Samantha Evans knew one thing for certain. She had already won. When regret becomes painful, the world had shifted. 2 years ago, Samantha Evans had been the subject of mockery, the woman everyone expected Andrew Carlisle to leave. She had been judged, underestimated, dismissed as someone unworthy of standing by his side. Now, she was the woman everyone wanted to be associated with, a self-made success story, a CEO running a billion-dollar health and wellness empire, and a symbol of resilience and power. But while some people had swallowed their pride and accepted the new reality, others were still struggling with the weight of their own mistakes. And for some, that regret was painful. The ones who lost the most. Among the many who had doubted Samantha, there were a few who had been particularly vocal. Michael Vaughn, Andrew's childhood friend, was one of them. He had been the first to laugh behind Andrew's back when he had announced his engagement. "Come on, man. Be serious. This is just a phase, right?" He had been the one who had outright refused to attend the wedding. "I'll send a gift. But honestly, this is embarrassing, dude." He had been the one who had made bets with others on how quickly the marriage would fall apart. And now, Michael was the one suffering the most from his own arrogance. As Andrew's business empire expanded, opportunities were constantly growing. New deals, powerful investments, lucrative partnerships. Andrew's circle had access to some of the most exclusive financial opportunities in the world. Opportunities that Michael could have been a part of if he hadn't burned the bridge. But now, Andrew had cut him off completely. Michael tried to act like it didn't bother him, but his bank account told a different story. While Andrew's other friends, the ones who had supported his marriage, were thriving, Michael found himself struggling to keep up. His own investments had begun to fail. His business partnerships were collapsing. The same social circle he once belonged to had pushed him to the sidelines. And all because he had been too blind to see the truth. The truth that Andrew had never made a mistake. The truth that Samantha was not just a great choice. She was the best choice Andrew had ever made. The women who had mocked Samantha, now wishing they were her. While Michael suffered from his own downfall, there were others who struggled in a different way. Some of the same women who had once whispered about how unattractive and unfit Samantha were now staring at her in envy. They had laughed at her curves. They had mocked her background. They had rolled their eyes at her confidence. But now, they wanted to be her. They saw her in magazines, on television, leading panels at global conferences. They saw the way Andrew looked at her, like she was the most beautiful and powerful woman in the world. And that was when the regret truly hit them. Because while they had wasted years playing the part of perfection, Samantha had been building something real. They had spent their lives chasing rich men. Samantha had built her own wealth. They had spent their time competing for male validation. Samantha had secured real power. And while they had once laughed at her, now they were the ones sitting alone, wondering where they had gone wrong. Regret burned deep. Eleanor Carlisle's full acceptance. For 2 years, Eleanor Carlisle had been in denial. She had never outright insulted Samantha, but she had never truly accepted her either. She had treated her with cold politeness, always assuming that one day Andrew would come to his senses. But now, Eleanor could no longer deny the truth. One evening, as she sat in her mansion, flipping through a business magazine, she saw a full-page feature on Samantha Carlisle, CEO of Vitale Wellness Group, the woman who redefined success. The headline read, Eleanor stared at the photo. Samantha, standing tall in a sleek black dress, her confidence radiating through the pages. She read the article, every word. And with each sentence, the weight of her own mistakes settled on her chest. She had spent years believing that no woman was good enough for her son. But in the end, it was Samantha who was too good for the world Eleanor belonged to. It was Samantha who had proven everyone wrong. And for the first time in her life, Eleanor felt something she never thought she would: shame. That evening, she picked up her phone and did something she should have done years ago. She called Samantha, and this time, her voice was genuine. "Samantha," Eleanor said, her voice softer than ever, "I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you." For a moment, there was silence. Then Samantha let out a small chuckle. "Well, Eleanor, I never thought I'd hear those words from you." Eleanor sighed. "Neither did I." But she meant it. She had been wrong about everything. Andrew's victory without words. Andrew had never needed to prove anything to anyone. He had married Samantha because he loved her, not because he wanted to make a statement. But now, the world had seen the truth for themselves. And the best part, he never had to say, "I told you so." The regret in their faces, the envy in their eyes, the silence in the same rooms where there had once been laughter at Samantha's expense, that was enough. As he stood beside his wife at a gala one evening, watching as some of the same people who had once doubted her now lined up to shake her hand, he simply smiled. "Samantha," he whispered, leaning close to her ear, "you've always been a queen. They just took too long to see it." She smirked, squeezing his hand. "Well, they know now." And with that, they walked forward, leaving behind the past, leaving behind the laughter, leaving behind the doubters. Because in the end, success is the best revenge. And regret. Regret is a pain that never truly fades. The ultimate poetic justice. The world had changed. 2 years ago, Samantha Evans had been a woman people whispered about behind Andrew Carlisle's back. She had been ridiculed, dismissed, and doubted at every turn. Now she was a force to be reckoned with. Not just Andrew Carlisle's wife. Not just a woman who had gotten lucky. She was Samantha Carlisle, a billionaire CEO, an industry leader, and a name that commanded respect, whether people liked it or not. But while success had silenced many, there were still those who struggled with their own regrets. And for some, that regret was about to turn into complete humiliation. The event that changed everything. It was supposed to be another grand, elite gathering, the kind of event where only the most powerful and influential people were invited. A gala hosted by one of the most prestigious business organizations in the country, an event where billionaires, politicians, and high-profile investors came together. Andrew had attended these events many times before. But this time, Samantha was not just Andrew's guest. She was the guest of honor. Vitale Wellness Group, the billion-dollar health and fitness empire she had built from the ground up, was being recognized for its impact on the industry. She was set to receive the Entrepreneur of the Year award, a moment that would solidify her place among the most powerful business leaders in the world. The same people who had once dismissed her as a nobody were now standing in a room celebrating her success. And the irony, many of them still couldn't believe it was happening. The people who once laughed, now begging for her attention. As Samantha entered the gala with Andrew by her side, the shift in energy was undeniable. Women who had once whispered about how unfit and undeserving, she was now looked at her with envy. Men who had once mocked Andrew for settling were now lining up to shake her hand. And the most satisfying part, Samantha didn't need to say a word. Her presence alone was enough. The same socialites who had once ignored her now clung to every word she said. The same business moguls who had doubted her now wanted partnerships with her company. And the most desperate of them all, Michael Vaughn. Michael Vaughn's public humiliation. Michael had once been Andrew's closest friend, until his arrogance and jealousy had destroyed everything. He had mocked Andrew's choice in a wife, had refused to attend their wedding, and had made bets on when Andrew would leave her. Now he was the one losing everything. His business ventures had failed. His social status had plummeted. And now he was desperately trying to claw his way back up. When he spotted Andrew and Samantha at the gala, he saw his chance. He straightened his suit, put on his most charming smile, and approached them as if nothing had ever happened. "Andrew, buddy, long time no see," Michael said, reaching out his hand. "We should catch up." Andrew didn't move. Samantha didn't move. The silence was deafening. Michael cleared his throat and turned to Samantha, pretending as if he had always been supportive. "Samantha, wow, look at you," he said with a forced chuckle. "CEO, award winner, you really proved a lot of people wrong, huh?" She tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Did I?" Michael's smile faltered for a second, but he quickly recovered. "Hey, you know how it is. People talk. They make assumptions. But listen, I was thinking, maybe we could do business together. Your company's booming, and I have some great ideas for—" Samantha held up her hand. Michael stopped talking. Her next words shattered him completely. "Michael, do you remember 2 years ago, when you told Andrew that marrying me was a mistake?" she asked, her voice smooth but piercing. His face turned pale. "Iva, do you remember how you refused to attend our wedding?" she continued. Michael swallowed hard. "Samantha, come on, that was. Do you remember?" She cut him off, her eyes locking onto his. "How you placed bets on when Andrew would leave me." The entire room went silent. People were watching, listening. Michael's face burned with humiliation. He glanced around, realizing that everyone had heard. There was no escaping this moment. I was stupid," he stammered. "I didn't know what I was talking about. I was wrong. Okay. I see that now." Samantha simply smiled. "Yes, you were wrong." Then, without another word, she turned her back on him. Andrew followed. Michael stood there, utterly humiliated. And the worst part, no one came to his defense. He had destroyed himself. Eleanor Carlisle's redemption. As the night continued, there was one person who had been watching everything. Eleanor Carlisle. For years, she had silently doubted Samantha, had believed deep down that her son had made a mistake. But now she couldn't ignore the truth anymore. Samantha had proven everyone wrong, and Eleanor knew that it was time to finally accept reality. As Samantha stood on stage, receiving her award, Eleanor felt something she had never felt before. Pride. For the first time, she saw Samantha not as the woman who had stolen her son, but as the woman who had made him better. When Samantha stepped off stage, Eleanor approached her. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Samantha," Eleanor said, her voice softer than it had ever been, "I was wrong about you." Samantha studied her, waiting. "I thought I knew what was best for my son," Eleanor continued. "I thought I knew the kind of woman he needed, but you have proven me wrong in every possible way." A pause. Then Eleanor did something no one expected. She reached out and hugged Samantha. And this time, it was genuine. Samantha didn't need Eleanor's approval. But in that moment, she knew she had won. Not just success, not just power, but the ultimate respect from a woman who had once doubted her existence. Andrew's final words. As the night came to an end, Andrew and Samantha stood on the balcony, overlooking the city. Andrew turned to her with a knowing smile. "You remember when they laughed at us?" he asked. Samantha smirked. "I do." He took her hand. "And look at them now." She leaned into him, her heart full. "They were waiting for us to fail," she said. He nodded. "But instead, we made them regret ever doubting us." Samantha smiled, gazing at the stars. "That," she whispered, "is the best revenge." And as they stood together, stronger than ever, the world finally understood the truth. They hadn't just survived. They had won. The sweetest victory. 2 years ago, the world had laughed. They had mocked Andrew Carlisle for his choice. They had whispered behind Samantha Evans' back, claiming she wasn't good enough, that she didn't belong in his world. They had waited for their marriage to crumble, for Andrew to come to his senses and leave her behind. But the world had been wrong. Now, Samantha stood at the pinnacle of success, a self-made billionaire, a respected industry leader, and a woman whose name commanded admiration across every social and business circle. The people who had once dismissed her were now desperate to be associated with her. And for the first time, they were forced to face the consequences of their own arrogance. The announcement that shook the business world. A few weeks after the gala, the world was hit with an announcement that sent shockwaves through both the corporate and social elite. Samantha Carlyle was stepping down as CEO of Vitalite Wellness Group. At first, people were confused. Why would she leave a billion-dollar empire she had built from the ground up? But then, the real news dropped. Samantha wasn't just stepping down. She was launching her own global wellness conglomerate, one that would dwarf Vitalite Wellness Group and completely redefine the industry. Her new company, Evans Carlyle Global, was going to be an empire unlike anything the world had ever seen. And the kicker? Andrew Carlyle was her first major investor. With Andrew's expertise in finance and Samantha's dominance in health and wellness, they weren't just building a business. They were creating a legacy. The reactions of those who had doubted her. The moment the news broke, regret hit like a thunderstorm. Investors who had refused to take Samantha seriously 2 years ago were now scrambling to get a piece of her new empire. Former business rivals who had once mocked her were now begging for partnerships. Even some of the same socialites who had whispered about her weight and her background were now attempting to reach out, pretending they had always been supportive. But Samantha hadn't forgotten. She never forgot. She remembered every cruel word, every dismissive glance, every bet placed against her marriage. So when former doubters came to her, asking for a seat at her table, she had only one response. No. There was no bitterness in her voice. No malice. Just a simple, undeniable truth. She no longer needed them. And they knew it. Michael Vaughan's final fall. If anyone had suffered the most from their own arrogance, it was Michael Vaughan. After his public humiliation at the gala, Michael had tried to salvage his career. But with every failed business deal, every lost opportunity, and every investor distancing themselves from him, his empire crumbled. Now he sat in his office, though calling it an office was generous. His once glamorous business had downsized to a small rented space in an average office building. His assistant entered, looking uncomfortable. "Sir, we just lost another investor." Michael clenched his jaw. "Who?" She hesitated. "Ethan Reynolds." Michael's heart sank. Ethan Reynolds was one of the last high-profile connections he had left. If he was pulling out, that meant one thing. Michael Vaughan was finished. His assistant cleared her throat. And, I should let you know. He pulled out because he's investing in Samantha Carlyle's new company. Silence. Michael's hands trembled as he gripped the edge of his desk. The same woman he had once laughed at. The same woman he had bet would fail. Now, she had taken everything from him, without lifting a single finger against him. Regret was a slow, burning poison. And now, it was eating him alive. Eleanor Carlyle's transformation. Eleanor Carlyle had once been the biggest skeptic of them all. She had raised her son to believe in tradition, in status, in marrying the right kind of woman. And for the longest time, she had resisted the idea that Samantha could ever belong in their world. But now, Eleanor couldn't imagine a world without her. Samantha had changed everything, not just for Andrew, but for Eleanor herself. For years, Eleanor had seen wealth and reputation as the ultimate markers of success. But Samantha had shown her that true power came from something greater. Not from money, not from influence, but from character, perseverance, and authenticity. One evening, Eleanor invited Samantha to tea. As they sat together in the grand Carlyle estate, Eleanor placed her cup down and looked at her daughter-in-law with genuine admiration. "You've made me rethink everything I believed in," Eleanor admitted. "And, for that, I owe you an apology." Samantha smiled softly. "You've already given me the best apology I could ask for." Eleanor tilted her head. "Oh, and what's that?" "You finally see me for who I am," Samantha said. "And that's enough." For the first time, Eleanor reached over and held Samantha's hand. And this time, it wasn't forced. It wasn't out of obligation. It was real. The legacy they built together. Months passed, and Evans Carlisle Global skyrocketed beyond expectations. The company became a global powerhouse, redefining the way people saw health, wellness, and business. But more importantly, Samantha and Andrew thrived together. Their marriage, the one that people had bet against, was stronger than ever. One evening, as they stood on the rooftop of their new headquarters, looking over the city, Andrew pulled Samantha close. "2 years ago, they laughed at us," he murmured. Samantha chuckled. "And now?" He kissed her forehead. "Now they wish they had been on our side all along." She turned to him, her eyes shining. "We didn't just prove them wrong, Andrew." He nodded, understanding. "We built something that no one can ever take away from us," she finished. And with that, they walked forward, together, stronger than ever, leaving behind the past and stepping into a future that was theirs to own. Because the greatest revenge isn't proving people wrong. It's thriving so completely that they regret ever doubting you in the first place. And for Samantha and Andrew Carlisle, their story wasn't just about love. It was about beating the odds and emerging victorious. And the world would never forget it.